Because when I got off that plane, I was immediately approached by a customs officer who wanted to search my bags. Well, I had a backpack, and I had checked 2 bags. One of them was this big green Army duffel bag. And I told him that they were checked. And he said, well, we'll go to the flight line and we'll get them. And we went to the flight line and we saw the workers unloading all the passengers' bags into a big pile. And I thought, how am I going to find my 2 bags in that big pile? But as we got closer, lo and behold, my 2 bags were already set aside. How did that happen? Nevertheless, it made it very easy. I could grab my bag. Oh, here they are. They're not in the pile, they're right here. Gave it to the customs officer. We went to some back room back in the terminal, and he would search through all the stuff. And then when he didn't find anything, he would search through my backpack. And in my backpack, he would say that I was carrying suspicious documents. He said I was carrying suspicious documents. He didn't know what they were. He just said they were suspicious. And then all of a sudden there were intelligence officers there. Army counterintelligence. Naval criminal investigators. The FBI, they were there. And then they would say that I was carrying classified documents. They made these spurious claims that I was carrying classified documents, after which they were very easily able to get an arrest warrant. And I was thrown in jail, arrested in secret. Nobody knew I had gotten arrested. I never made my connecting flight back to Seattle. My wife and daughter were there waiting for me. I showed up. Well, they were there hours. And when I didn't show up, my wife, she would call my parents in New Jersey, thinking maybe they heard something from me. Maybe my plans had changed or something. But my parents hadn't heard anything either. I was gone. I had just disappeared. They had no idea where I was. But they learned about 10 days later of where I was. They learned from the media. When they saw me on the news, they saw the news of the day 10 days later, after I had disappeared, that the chaplain from Guantanamo Bay had been arrested and was now sitting in a super maximum security prison down in Charleston, South Carolina, while these accusations were swirling in the media that I had committed spying, espionage, aiding the enemy, mutiny and sedition, which is like trying to overthrow the government. And all of these offenses that I just mentioned are indeed capital crimes that you can receive the death penalty for. And in those first few days, I was actually threatened with the death penalty by a military prosecutor. But now I was sitting in this maximum security prison down in Charleston, in the facility known as the Consolidated Naval Break. Interestingly enough, this particular facility is where our government holds what's termed U.S. citizen enemy combatants. U.S. citizen enemy combatants. Foreign enemy combatants we know are held where? In Guantanamo Bay. And in those CIA black sites. But if you're an enemy combatant and you happen to be a U.S. citizen, you get brought to the Consolidated Naval Break. And there have been 2 noted enemy combatants, names of Jose Padilla, Yasser Hamdi. Well, I was in that very same prison at the same time they were there. When they transferred me there from Jacksonville, they shackled me up. How? At the wrist, and at the waist, and at the ankles, in a suit of chains. Well, that's the way they shackle prisoners in Guantanamo, in that very same way. But when they threw me in the back of this truck next to an armed guard, that armed guard would take out of his bag these goggles, blackened out goggles, painted black, and then he would put them on my eyes, so now I couldn't see anything. And the next thing he would take out of his bag were these heavy industrial type ear devices, or these ear muffs, and he put them on my ears. So now I can't hear anything. So I'm shackled at the wrist, waist, and ankles like a prisoner from Guantanamo. I got these goggles on my eyes, these things on my ears. This is a tactic which is known as sensory deprivation. That's what it's called. It's called sensory deprivation. And it's done to instill fear, intimidation, and confusion. But I knew about this tactic. I knew about it because down in Guantanamo, when the prisoners in process, they are subjected to sensory deprivation. Scary, fearful. Why? Because I knew the interpretation of our government of these individuals down in Guantanamo. That they didn't have any rights. That these were detainees. They didn't have rights. They were not prisoners of war. These enemy combatants who are subjected to sensory deprivation have no rights. So now I'm being treated in the very same way. Now fearing that my government has stripped from me all of my rights. No legal rights, maybe not even human rights. So I had no idea what was going to happen to me. Had no idea where they were taking me. And when they put me in this prison cell in solitary confinement, well, at least I was relieved to be alive. I was there for 76 days as these accusations were swirling that I was a terrorist spy. Well, after 76 days, what do you think happened next? I was suddenly released. Suddenly released. Never officially charged with these heinous crimes, even though there's plenty of documentation to show that they indeed were offenses that they wanted to charge me with. But they would charge me with what they called mishandling classified information. Mishandling classified information. And even though I was released, they still wanted to court-martial me, put me on trial for these lesser offenses. They wanted to keep me in jail. By this time, at least through due process, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, I was at least able to retain a civilian attorney, a military law expert. And in this pretrial hearing, one of the first things we did was we demanded from the government to turn over to us the official review of anything that they had seized from me to substantiate now these lesser charges of mishandling classified information, to show that I had something that was classified. And the response of the government in this pretrial hearing was, well, we actually haven't even conducted this kind of review yet. Well, what had happened? I had been thrown in jail, accused of being a terrorist spy, separated from my family, subjected to sensory deprivation, thrown in solitary confinement, and then charged with lesser offenses of mishandling classified information. And the government hadn't even conducted a review of anything that I had seized from me to show that I had something classified. Well, the judge had to immediately delay the trial, delay the pretrial hearing. It actually was delayed about 6 or 7 times after that. Because now they were fully investigating my whole life. But it wasn't just a couple papers that they were sifting through to find some classified information. They now literally had thousands of papers. Thousands of papers that they had seized from federal raids, like on my residence in Washington State, like on the Muslim Chaplain at Fort Lewis, Washington, where I had served prior to going to Guantanamo. They would raid my residence in Guantanamo as well. They would raid my office. So now they literally had boxes of papers that they would sift through because they wanted to find some classified information to say that I had wrongfully mishandled this stuff. But what would happen after months of investigation? Even those lesser charges would be simply dropped, disappear, and then I was reinstated as a Muslim chaplain. Sent back to Fort Lewis, Washington. My record was wiped clean. My record was wiped clear. And then I myself would take the next step and resign my commission. I resigned my commission. At least I was able to do that as an officer. But enlisted personnel who are in the military, they don't have that option. They can't resign. They're stuck because they're under contract. But as an officer, I was able to resign my commission. And I would leave the military in January of 2005. Received an honorable discharge. Yes, an honorable discharge. And when I left the military, I also received a second U.S. Army Commendation Medal for, quote, exceptionally meritorious service.